First of all, good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Thank you very much for coming. Today's topic is marijuana, a halachic perspective. The hardest part of preparing for this class was how to spell marijuana. I'm telling you,
There's so many choices.
Yeah, I wasn't sure how to spell it, but we figured it out.
When you're high, it's really hard to spell things.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah. So when we talk about marijuana, there are three issues. One is it halachically permitted? Number two, if it is permitted, should it be allowed? Or another way to saying it is, should it be encouraged? And then there's a third aspect, which is medical marijuana, which is certainly not my expertise. Neither is actually the first one, but certainly medical marijuana is something completely different than recreational marijuana. So we'll be talking primarily about recreational marijuana, and then I'll end off with some words of caution about medical marijuana. Actually, you know, if I were to give a class on, are you allowed to make Jell-O on Shabbos? Chances are I wouldn't get a very large crowd. And if someone called me up and said, are you allowed to make Jell-O on Shabbos, or how do you prepare hot food on Shabbos? It's very clear cut, and most people will accept it as that's the law, and then they have a private, their struggle would be, should I listen to the law or shouldn't I listen to the law? However, when it comes to things of emotion, it's very hard to remain objective. So all of us know the power and the importance of pleasure. And if someone wants to take away your pleasure, it's not only a question anymore about is it right or wrong, but it becomes personal. Perhaps a way to bring this out is, it has been pointed out many times, when a rabbi would give a verdict on whether an animal is kosher or not, he would, so let's make believe a butcher would come and say, we just slaughtered a steer or a bull, and is it kosher? And the rabbi would come and check the organs and say, sadly, it is not kosher, which for the butcher might be $1,000 loss. But if he's a religious person, observant, and he believes that's the will of God, he'll accept it. But if that very same butcher has a din Torah, if he has some type of a disagreement with his neighbor about, they both promised that they would participate in making a common driveway, they would pave it, and they're arguing about $200. One of them says, you promised, the other one says, I did it, back and forth, let's go to the rabbi, and the rabbi says, for example, he doesn't have to give you the $200, chances are the person will leave accepting the law but upset with the rabbi, or upset with the law. Now the obvious question is, here he was willing to suffer $1,000 loss, and he accepted it without an emotional response, other than, I guess that's the will of God. But here, he has to pay $200 because the rabbi said so. He's upset. What's the answer? The answer is that the other person is gaining $200. In other words, there's an emotional thing over here. When two people are disagreeing about who has to pay, there's a concept of one up over the other. So if the halacha is, this person is correct or that person is correct, that means the other person is losing. I don't want to lose out in terms of so-and-so. So when you have a discussion about marijuana, which is a pleasure, it's a recreational drug, there are people that are immediately going to begin with an emotional attachment either to or against, depending on their background, and therefore even when they listen to this type of a lecture or at least a presentation, they already have made up their mind one way or another. That is why actually I see most of the people that are sitting by the table are very, very young, but over 25. However, if I were to have the same conversation with people under 25, it would take a very, very different track, and I'd get a lot more feedback and a lot more argument because they're attached to this. I'm trying to take something away from them, whereas in the majority of, I'm assuming, of the people over here, even if it's something that you occasionally indulge in, it's It's nice, it's no big fuss. If you tell me not to use it, I won't use it. If you tell me it's forbidden to use it, I won't use it. You say it's allowed, then I'll continue. But you're not vested in this. And this is always an issue whenever you talk about something about of Jewish law. You have to remember there's the emotional component of it and there's the legal component of it. And that is why whenever you talk about, let's say, relationships or sexuality or anything like that, right away, people, the more emotional, the more personal, the more it's difficult to actually have this conversation. So I'm going to assume for a moment that we're all pariv, we're all neutral about this, and we're curious, can recreational marijuana be considered a valid form of recreation? Well, the first thing is, we'll start with number one. It does affect a person physically and mentally. Whenever we talk about something that changes the body or affects the body, it becomes actually it's a spiritual question because we are body and soul, and it's also a physiological question or a medical issue. Everyone would agree and has to agree, why do we like marijuana? Because it does something for us. Clearly there's a change in the body. How is there a change in the body? Because it affects the way the receptors of the mind work. Now, one of the reasons why I won't be talking medicine is because, in all honesty, I can't pronounce most of the words. It's sad and it's cute at the same time. But the basic idea is that there's something when you, and I'll use the word smoke for now, when you smoke marijuana, what happens is that there's an area of the brain which is what we call the reward area. And you are rewarded for smoking. In other words, you feel good about smoking. Somehow there's the way the synapses and dopamine and all kinds of fancy words that they use. The ultimate thing is that it makes you feel good. Now I want to stop for a second. Is feeling good a mitzvah?
Yes. Mitzvah gedola liot b'simcha. Tamid.
I didn't say happy. I asked the word, is feeling good a mitzvah? And it's an interesting question from my opinion, because feeling good about what? Let's say I feel good when I waste time. Okay? So I spend the night watching TV and I feel good about it while I was watching. Okay?
Rabbi Hecht, someone lit up in your shul.
Okay. You understand? Is that something, is feeling good really a mitzvah or not? Obviously, there are certain people that eat certain foods which are harmful for them, though they feel good, at least when they're eating it. So it's an interesting question about taking a puff of marijuana or whatever it is in order to feel good. And you have to stop right away and say, who says feeling good is a mitzvah? You say, well, okay, maybe it's not a mitzvah, but is it a sin? Anything that affects your body essentially has to be examined. In other words, for Jewish people, this is actually like the ABC. Before you eat anything, is it kosher? That's the first question we ask. Most people who are not Jewish, or certainly not who don't keep the laws of kashrus, don't really ask that question. The first question is it tasty, or is it healthy, or maybe the other way around, but not is it permitted. And the first question that a Jew has to ask is it permitted? So one of the questions that we would say is marijuana permitted? Now, there's this idea of, and this is on your sheet 2.2. There's this idea of to change a status quo. As of now, marijuana is not part of the usual eating and drinking of a person. In other words, in terms of a person's activities. And as of fairly recent, or very recent, the idea of feeling good by lighting up a joint was also not accepted, for whatever reason it might be. Now the question is, can we introduce that into our life? Whenever you want to introduce something new into your life, you have to first stop and examine and ask, why do I want to do it? And B, what will the effect have on me? The reality is that the effect of smoking marijuana, it has an effect on your brain. Now, again, why does it have an effect on your brain? Because it interferes with the usual functioning of the brain. It adds something to the brain which is not usually there. I will again try to go in order, but I'm going to take the liberty of going a little bit, using it more as a circle for a second. Whenever I've had a conversation with people about marijuana, almost always the instinctive reaction was, you drink, it's better than drinking, or drinking is addictive, or drinking is harmful, and if drinking is permitted, marijuana for sure. Or if a person's a smoker or something to that effect, it's like, no one said smoking is forbidden, right? And if that's the case, if smoking is forbidden, so then this is much better. There's a fallacy in this way of thinking. What's one of the deficiencies of this line of thinking? You're right. Drinking is not good either. Smoking is not good either. Now what? Let's take a step back for a moment, okay? I mentioned that before we introduce something new in our life, especially if it's connected to the mind, we have to really do it from a viewpoint of seeing the present, not only the present but the future as the future as well. Okay. Let's stop for a second.
iPhone.
Today, before we get to the iPhone, if you were to ask any learned person, is drinking permitted? You say, drinking what? Drinking alcohol, is it permitted? And the answer would be, yes, as far as I know, as long as it's not Yom Kippur or Pesach, you could drink,
driving.
But okay, very good. No, really, Moshe Meir, thank you very much. But then society has pointed out that when you drink, certain motor activities are impaired, and therefore you are not permitted legally to drive if you're under the influence of a certain amount of alcohol, even if you claim, and many can, be in complete control. Okay. Can you drink to get stoned, or is it permitted to drink to get drunk? What's the answer to that? Are you permitted to drink? The answer is yes. Okay, but then, as it was pointed out, there are certain activities which society or the law has said is forbidden. You may not drink and do brain surgery. You may not drink. I think it's even up to 24 hours and pilot a plane. Yeah. There's a big movie that just came out not too long ago about that, So then clearly it has an effect on a person, and it's the interest of society to interfere with a person's pleasure. So now the question is a different one. Is it permitted to drink in order to get drunk?
Drunk has a negative connotation. Can you drink to achieve a certain feeling?
No, that's not to achieve a certain feeling. The word I'm using is drunk for a reason. Okay.
Created by who? By
in Jewish law.
No, but
Because according to secular law, if you're not going to work until Monday, there's no reason why Saturday night you can't get drunk. Get drunk, hey, just don't kill anyone. Okay? You understand? Don't harm others. Question is, are you permitted to get drunk?
on Purim, yes. But can you
So the
feel
answer is no. You are not permitted to drink to get drunk. There are times when there's only 2 times of a year, only one in particular, Purim, where there's a mitzvah. And then I would argue, if God and the sages that are in tune with God's will, if He desires or He allows or He encourages a type of an inebriation which legally could be called drunk, then actually it's not drunk at all. It's actually a holy form of service. And that is why even on Purim, we're now off the subject completely, but even on Purim, if a person's going to get drunk and not listen to the Megillah, or a person's going to get drunk and drop out, he's not going to do the other commandments of giving gifts and charity, or heaven forbid, a person's going to get drunk and then decide that this gives him the allowance to break his neighbor's window, every rabbi, including the most Hasidic, would say you're not allowed to drink. Because for you, drinking is harmful. So if a person physically is adverse to alcohol, and he comes to the rabbi, he says, whenever I take more than an ounce of alcohol, I literally get sick. Am I obligated on Purim? The answer is no, you're not obligated on Purim. When it comes to Pesach, which is an obligation, then we start negotiating. Maybe grape juice, maybe you dilute it, but not on Purim. So again, are you permitted to get drunk? No. That's it. There's no question about that. Can you drink to feel relaxed? Or is it permitted to drink to feel good? Mm-hmm. That already is a question that will be answered differently. With one major issue. How do you know how much will make you feel good? When does making you feel good go over the line that makes you drunk? And it's an amazing concept, even though this is not really what we should be focusing on, but it's a major issue how a person sees himself when he's drinking and how other people see. So a person drinks and he thinks he's so brilliant and he's so smart and he's so freilich and so this and so that. And then he asks his best friends, how was I? They don't answer. He asks his wife, she's smart, she doesn't answer. But then he hears from people that don't like him, you were drunk, you were a skunk, you were a pig, you said things, shame on you. And he doesn't remember any of that, because in his mind, he was so good. So, can you drink to feel good? I would leave that as an open question, because how many of us are able to distinguish between feeling good, relaxed, and open, to the next step of actually getting drunk, which at best means you're immune to the outside, which means that the positive commandments of being sensitive towards your fellow man are completely out of your control. Which also means in Jewish law that many times you're not permitted to pray. And certainly if you're a rabbi and you're studying Torah, for the purpose of sharing Jewish law, if you study it when you're drunk, there's no doubt that it is forbidden to do this, because your conclusion will be wrong. So let's go back again. When someone says, is it permitted to do marijuana? And if the answer will be no, the response almost is, but you're allowed to drink. So the answer is no, you're not allowed to drink. But everyone is drinking, so they're doing wrong. That's all. The question over here is not, are they doing right or wrong? The question is, you want to introduce something new. So far, people are not doing recreational marijuana as much as they do drinking. So now the question is, can we introduce that in lieu of, or instead of, or sometimes in addition to? The answer is no. Because if the purpose is to get drunk, it makes no difference if it's alcohol or if it is smoking. If the result is the same, I shouldn't say the result because it's not the same. If the goal is the same, the goal is basically to be feeling so good that to the extent that you become, I used the word before, insensitive. You become blind to the next door neighbor. You become blind to your guy sitting next to you. Then it's forbidden. Okay.
L'chaim.
Okay. Let me read very, very quickly. Let me read very, very quickly of something very short. There's something called abuse or addiction. The word addiction today is confusing because people can be addicted, so to speak, based on a medical condition. People can be addicted based on an activity. You keep on doing an activity which causes you pleasure. So let's say, for example, a person who's addicted to gambling, basically if they put electrodes on him, all of the parts of the brain, when he sees, the wheel spinning, especially if he actually wins, they light up, not any different than a person who was heavily on drugs. But it's a different form of addiction. If you keep a guy from Las Vegas, he will not have physical effects on him, other than I'm bored, I want to go but if you take a person off cocaine or heroin, there's clearly withdrawal systems. Based on that, everyone's like, see, what's wrong with marijuana? You're not addicted to it. So let me point out, the word addiction is not a good word to use in many, many cases. A better word to use is 3 words to remember: use, abuse, and dependence. Can a person use marijuana to get where he wants to go? The answer is a person can. Is it forbidden halachically? I don't know of why it should be forbidden. I can't see what's the sin. So you want to go from point A being unhappy to point B being relaxed. That's usage. The question is, can the usage of something lead to the abuse of something? And the answer is yes. I could start off with something as basic as eating, right? So can you use a dessert or an ice cream cake, to convey a certain feeling of joy or celebration? The answer is yes. Can you abuse eating sweets? There's no question about it. Most of us are dealing with it. Okay. Then there's a third concept, which is called depending on it. And that is the most severe. Because if you're abusing something, you're still in control per se of yourself. Once you become dependent on it, and to a certain extent, it's not in your control anymore. What is considered abuse/dependence? When you try, but you can't stop. When you're preoccupied with this. If you're neglecting other parts which used to be very important to you, but now they're secondary. What's more important is the fix. And finally, you deny that you have a problem.
Yeah.
That in itself is often the proof that you are so dependent on it that this thing that you started off as using has become abusing. So let's go back again. When someone says taking a joint, smoking doesn't really affect me, then ask him why is he doing it. Right? So clearly, taking marijuana means it does affect you. How it affects you is, there are books and books. This one that I actually have is from a MD who was the head of one of the big the drug things, whatever. You could even do a simple whatever it is, or Mayo, just do effects of marijuana, you'll find hundreds of sites. Okay, so there are effects, physically and psychologically. Are they bad effects? Not necessarily in a one-time usage. The question is, when we ask, is marijuana halachically permitted, the question would be not is it permitted a one-time thing, the question would be more is it halachically okay as a method of relaxation? And I obviously am going to take the stand that no, it should not be used. Number B, we're obligated to study Torah. Now I want to say this is an obvious concept, that we're obligated to use the mind for the study of Torah. If a person is going to be under the effect of marijuana, clearly the attention that he's going to have to the understanding of Torah, which demands something called critical thinking, which I'll get back to in a minute, in addition to which the idea of being focused on a mitzvah is completely lost. When I say completely lost, I should really change the language. It is lost. I'm going to tell you something a little bit off on left field. Even to enhance the relationship of intimacy, the rabbis say you should not be drunk. You say, whoa, it relaxes me, it opens me up to the experience. And actually, if you need alcohol for the intimate experience with your spouse, then you're not intimate at all. There's something fundamentally missing, that you need something artificial to create an artificial feeling, or better yet, to deaden, because that's what alcohol does, it's a depressant, it actually to deaden certain parts of you in order for you to appreciate it. So this is actually in halacha. It's one of the 9 things that we're taught that you have to be careful about in intimacy, certainly when you're not drunk. That's forbidden. But you say to yourselves, it seems to be so much of a part of life. And I could go on and on off the subject, but the fact that it's a part of life then tells us how sad and how incorrect some of the relationships are. If you need marijuana to relax, that's one issue. The question is, now that you're relaxed under marijuana, will you be able to take out a Talmud, or for that matter, a book of Hasidus, and give it your full attention? And the answer is you can't. It's beyond you. You're essentially, to a certain extent, your mind is in a fog. That's what relaxes you, because you actually don't care so much what's happening. P.S. Those people that claim that under the influence of alcohol, they're more sensitive to smell, to taste. They've actually done studies. And the person who is under the influence has no special abilities to tell the difference between shades of color or between nuances in music. There's no difference between a person who's on it or who's not on it in terms of actually telling the difference. The only difference is the way they perceive it or feel it. They think. It's almost like the guy who takes the drink. He thinks he's more brilliant than he really is. So the person who's stoned or very little thinks that the flowers, nothing has changed. They actually cannot tell a blue flower from a violet flower any different than someone else. They don't see any different. The difference is they think they see it. Mm-hmm. And that's an important concept, because that's essentially an illusion. So the first thing is anything that's going to affect your health, whether it be physically or mentally, and certainly emotionally, needs to be thought about, and your first thought should be, if I don't need it, maybe I should keep away from it. That should be the first thing. The second thing, on a practical level, how long does this effect remain with you? Let's make believe, I have no idea, let's make believe it's 6 hours. During those 6 hours, the obligation to study Torah and to do mitzvahs has now been secondary, minimized, and if you do it, you're doing it actually incorrectly. There's another thing which is quite interesting, number D. There is something about this particular drug which has an effect on the amygdala, actually I pronounced it correctly, believe it or not, and it has something to do with suckling. Very simple. When a baby is born, it needs to nurse. Who taught the baby how to nurse? And it's very hard, by the way. Those nursing mothers know you got to bring it to the nipple and you have to encourage it. The answer is there's something in the brain, and he has an
it's instinct.
Yeah, but in other words, they actually are able to pinpoint it to the place in the brain which causes the infant to suckle.
Yeah.
Interesting enough, that is the same place where marijuana has an effect. And that is why those that use marijuana often get hungry. They want to nibble on something. And it's interesting, you would think to yourself, you didn't really expend that many calories, why do they want to nibble? And it actually has the same, it actually touches the same place. Why am I bringing this in? Because it's hard enough to keep away from noshing when we're full. And when we're not only full, but when we're very much in control of ourselves, and then someone says, "You sure you don't want a chocolate mousse?" And something like that, and you have to think it's not easy. Basically, our attraction for food and drink is something it's primal. It's very, 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 very important to us. Imagine now if there's something in your mind that somehow is motivating you to put something in your mouth. So you say, what's wrong with that? Nothing and everything. Nothing is wrong with that because what you're going to put in your mouth is kosher. Everything is because it's so hard to control your appetite. So now we're stimulating our appetite. And essentially, something which is unnecessary, in fact, too much is not good. They say a very practical story, I just thought of it now, but it's a true story. A fellow came, he was a poor fellow, and he was collecting money. So the lady of the house saw him and she said, you look like you could use a good meal. Can I give you something to eat? So he said, actually, I'm not hungry, but if you give me a drink, that will stimulate my appetite. So she says, my job is to feed the hungry, not to create the hungry. But there's a certain amount of that. You understand? Here's a person who, thank God, doesn't need munchies, But if after smoking, just like some people do with drinking, they wouldn't eat some of the stuff, but then after a drink or two, you take, something to go along with it. So you're actually creating a desire, and from a Torah perspective, creating desire is not, for physical stuff, which is not necessary, is completely not kosher. There's also a very practical thing, and here we have to make a very important distinction. In this group over here, if anyone or everyone took a puff or whatever it is, indulged occasionally, again, as a rabbi, I really couldn't tell you that it's a terrible sin. But this is very different than people growing up in adolescence. And most of this discussion is actually not with people over 40. The discussion about legalizing marijuana, that it should be a part of ordinary life, as in a weekend and so on, is actually being fueled to a great extent in the younger generation. And I'll go in two different directions. But in the younger generation, it's so interesting that medically speaking, there's a place called the frontal cortex, which basically means that's the place of the mind where people make moral decisions. And they've proven this, and it's a sort of a medical fact, that though the mind is mature enough to think and to understand one way or another, to make moral decisions, which is to see the effect of a decision in the future, is not fully developed until around 22 or so. The reason why I find it fascinating is because in Jewish tradition, we're already taught that you're an adult from the age of 13, but actually when it comes to a moral decision, God does not punish you until you're 20. Yeah, I'm sure you might have heard of this. And in general, the whole idea of getting married around 20 and so on is because now there's a further development. It's almost like two levels of maturity. Puberty and then young adulthood, in this case 20 and over. Because this is the time where your mind is not only continuously growing, but especially in the frontal cortex, which is still not fully developed, interfering with its normal way of development is harmful. And in this case, marijuana does bind to different parts of different receptors, so to speak, in the brain. And one of the places where it does bind is in the frontal cortex, which essentially means a heavy user of marijuana when they're younger actually interferes with their capacity and their capability of knowing right from wrong as they grow older. So there is, as I'm saying, there's a certain amount of discussion that we could have, and basically it's not any worse than taking a couple of drinks. But that's for this group. You understand? But when you're talking about your teenage son or your teenage daughter, it's a different thing completely. And because it's so fraught with danger for younger people, it actually becomes now on the older, quote unquote, more mature people, because they learn from us. So when someone says, I could do it, it takes the edge off, but you can't, right away, it doesn't sound right, it is not right, and they will, if it's good for my dad, it's good for my mom, it's good for me. Most parents, now I don't know, I didn't take a study, but it would seem to me from the little bit that you read and hear, most parents want their kids to excel in school. They want their kids to be good in sports. They want the kids to be popular. And what they all want is that the kids should not do drugs. I don't know, maybe there's an exception to the rule, but as a general rule, the best that you could hear from a parent is, when he gets older, I don't mind. But when you're in school, you got to concentrate. So, question, is there anything halachically wrong with taking marijuana? So the answer is, if you're a kid, besides the emotional and physical harm you're doing to yourself, in addition to the fact that adult and minor are not serving God properly through Torah mitzvahs because they can't, their mind is befuddled. In addition to that, you're also not respecting your parents. And it's an opportunity to fight over this, and there's no reason for that. So you want, again, question is, can this become a recreational thing? So some people go out and play tennis, some people go out and drink, and I'm going to hang out 15 years old in the backyard with my friends, and we're all going to do a joint together. No, you cannot, should not, may not. Why? Partially because your parents don't want. And that's a good enough reason in Jewish law. Besides, whether or not it might be illegal, that I don't know, depending on the locality. Okay, two more things, G and H, and then we're going to go over this again and talk more about the concept. Number one, there's a great argument whether or not this is a gateway to other drugs. And a lot of, 2/3, statistically speaking, 2/3 of people between the ages of 12 and 20, 2/3 of them, if not more, who do marijuana on a regular basis will do drugs further. Now, there has been no linkage that because you're taking it, you will do it. And again, you could wean yourself off marijuana without having a physical dependence on it, but it does create an emotional dependence on it. In other words, when a kid begins to feel that the way to deal with his parents or with the school or with society is by literally obscuring their vision. I don't want to use the word drop out, that's what they used to say in LSD in the 1960s, 70s, drop out of society. They don't want to drop out of society, but they really want to insulate themselves. So when they're doing what they're doing, really it makes no difference to the world. 2/3 of these people will go on to experiment and to get involved with something else. So if I asked you, should a person do recreational marijuana, and they always say, it doesn't harm anyone, it's simply not true. Statistically speaking, for children, 2/3 of them will continue to do something far more harmful, and it started from this. Another thing is, number H, look after yourself very well, even though in the Chumash of Deuteronomy that's talking about keeping away from idolatry, the concept is we're obligated to be healthy. The idea of, no one will tell you that marijuana is part of keeping good health. What they'll tell you is, if you have to relax, it seems to be better than A, B, and C. But no one will tell you that you have to take marijuana to be healthy. Right away, if that is the fact, then we have to say to ourselves that because there's so much evidence of the idea of it being harmful to the body, it is forbidden. So let me quickly finish the first part of this class. Halachically speaking, according to Jewish law, are you permitted to take a puff of marijuana? To the best of my knowledge, the answer is yes, you may. Can you do this on a regular basis? The answer is, I would say it is forbidden. Why? Not because of the immediate, but because of what's associated with it. I didn't even deal with if according to law it's illegal, it's illegal. I have nothing to do with that. Then that means you're breaking the law. As a general rule, you're supposed to listen to the law. As a general rule. So you have to figure that in as well. But assuming it is legal, should it be allowed as a recreation? Is it as harmless as playing tennis? The answer is no, it is not. Why? A, it does have an effect on you. I'm going to talk more about this in a minute. 2, while you're under the influence, you're not studying Torah, doing mitzvahs properly. 3, very good chance that it's actually creating a desire to eat, to do this, to do that, where you would not have had it before. Number 4, chances are your parents don't like it, and that is absolutely a consideration. And finally, you never know. Look at this idea of where it will lead you to. Okay, that's number 1. However, hopefully I made it clear to you, there is a difference between occasional usage and constant usage, and more importantly, a difference between children or adolescents and adults. Now let's talk about something else, okay? If it's permitted, should it be allowed? Or should it be encouraged? Well, there's a long list of things that were introduced to us where we were told it's good for us. And that very long list continuously grows. So, for example, this just came out fairly in the last 3 or 4 months. It's now they tell you that children under the age of 2 should be kept away from all computers. It's not good for their brain for them to learn and to be engrossed with the computer screen. Period. I remember my brother Eli, who's still, God should give him good health, he had this preschool, and I remember when the whole thing of computers came out, he had a preschool, he had a nursery, he had like the 1st grade. The first thing he did was he brought in these computer games, and that was have your kid be stimulated by it. So you have these 3-year-old kids sitting and playing games, and it was supposed to be the greatest thing in the world. And now we know it's not the greatest thing in the world. If we talk about TV, I'm dating myself, but when I grew up, TVs came into its maturity in the late 1950s, and if you listen and you read a little bit of why it came in, they were going to make everyone smart in America, because they were going to beam into every home children programming and social programming, and I don't have to tell you, we all know what the TV is filled with. But it seemed so good at that time. It seemed so right at that time. If you talk about Facebook and stuff like that, I mean, there's never ending. It started off with the whole world could be yours, and you could have so many friends, and you could learn from this person and learn from that. And we see constantly the repercussion of. So here we have a question. This is something rather new. What does it mean rather new? It's not mainstream yet. And we want to make it by making it legal, we want to mainstream it. We want to make it as like you walk down the street over here, they sell medical marijuana. You know, they want to make it that wherever you go and you see people lighting up, it's fine. That means making it mainstream. How do we know now what's going to be in 10 years from now? And this is a serious social question. Before you introduce something to a society, who knows where it's going to lead to? And there's such a long list of where we see the good outweighing the bad, or the bad outweighing the good. We certainly should take very seriously this idea of legalizing marijuana, which means it's okay. One word about legalizing marijuana. I'm not getting into that debate for many reasons. One of them is there are much smarter people that have debated it back and forth. The second obvious reason is it doesn't make a difference, in my opinion. Whatever they decide, they'll decide. But there is something I do want to share with you. When you decriminalize, when you say it's not a criminal offense, that's far from saying it is the proper or the normal thing to do. So if part of it had to do with people were hungering after the forbidden fruits, or we're filling up our prisons with people that do marijuana, so the answer is that we shouldn't. But that's not saying the same thing as let's introduce it. They say that actually that in one of the very prominent court cases, there was one guy who was, I don't know, accused of embezzling who knows how much money from people. Of course, he got the best lawyers, and the government had the best lawyers. At the end, the judge said, we're dropping the case. So when he came out, this gangster, mamish real gangster, said to the press, they said I was innocent. You see, I was falsely accused. I'm innocent. When they asked the judge, he said, I never said he was innocent. All I said is that there's not enough stuff to prosecute him. That's all. He's guilty as hell. He is not a good person. He committed many crimes. I just can't criminalize him. He's not innocent. I just can't throw him into prison. When you decriminalize something, it doesn't make it the right thing to do because it's not criminal. So we could solve many issues by saying, okay, kids, if you light up, we're not going to throw you into prison. Why should we ruin your life over something as light as this? But that's very different than saying, okay, kids, it's okay. No, it's not okay. It's not the right thing. There's something which is very important, and that is, in general, how we look at the mind. I'm going to spend the next couple of minutes about this. It's going to come a time, and it's already happening, it's truly happening, where people like myself are really, one day will be respected. Why? Because I know so little about computers. Which basically means I still use my mind. People today have stopped thinking. They just don't think.
And consider it.
They have tremendous knowledge about anything and about everything. So they can tell you what this person said, what this person said, and depending on who says it the loudest or who says it the most, what do you say? What do you think? I don't know. I never had time to think. I'm too busy responding to the information. One of the reasons why today learning Gemara is both crucial and difficult, more difficult than ever before, is because you have to examine a text and figure out what is this text saying. And it doesn't think the way you think. It's weird in terms of Western thinking. But it makes you think. And that's an issue which today people, as a rule, have stopped thinking. They parrot information. Anything that interferes with thinking is not good. Period. Because man as a speaker is also supposed to be man as a thinker. And if man stops thinking, then he becomes nothing more than a parrot. And I wouldn't be surprised about how many people that are actually sending out the news and the information, they themselves don't believe it and don't even read it. They want everyone else to absorb it because they're still thinking of how to manipulate. This is true even about medicine. Now, I'm speaking as a lay person. Obviously, I can't speak with medical assurance because I'm not a medicine person, but I could speak as a lay person using what I would call just simple reasoning. It seems to me, and I could back this up with Torah, but I don't want to go off that subject for now. It's clear, I guess, to everyone in this room that if someone bruises his arm, right, or gets a scratch, medically speaking, it's a lot easier to deal with than if you have something wrong with your kidneys. The more internal, the more complex, the more difficult it is. But actually, controlling an organ through drugs is very different than controlling the thinking process through drugs. And that is why we are far more advanced in controlling heart disease than we are in controlling stuff that has to do with depression or bipolar or there's a gazillion things that have to do with the mind. And we are still in its infancy of how to deal with it, and there's a lot of trial and error, and yesterday's wonder drug is now thrown out because it's not good for you. Because no one really understands properly how the mind thinks and how the mind works and how the mind responds. And we're much better in how the heart responds to stress, or how the kidney, or how the liver. And that's also much harder than dealing with an outside scratch. But we're good with pharmaceuticals when it comes to that. When it comes to pharmaceuticals in your brain, we are dealing with one tremendous unknown. And it's amazing how different the drugs of yesteryear are today. Marijuana is a drug because it deals with the brain. It affects the brain. You wouldn't want to put something foreign in your heart. You don't want to do it in your kidney. Why do you want to do that to your brain? So then they always say, but people are drinking. There are two things I want to point. I started off by saying that one right, one wrong doesn't make something else. So if he asked the person, should you get drunk? The answer is no. With exceptions of very rare. But there's something else. The way alcohol deals with your mind, in a sense, is it deadens it. I told you, it's a depressant. The way marijuana deals with your mind is it excites it. What's the difference? Two things. When you're excited about something, you're hungering for that excitement. When you miss that excitement, you feel you're missing something. In addition to which, anytime something is overload, there is always the day after. And I want to read you this, actually, because it's just interesting. Where is it? Page 40, aftermath.
One is a depressant.
No, right now, until I finish, there's no questions. Okay, here it is. I want to read this for you. Even caffeine, let's say a person takes alcohol to be calm, the next day there's irritation and a hangover. If a person gets high from caffeine or cocaine or amphetamine, actually the day after or hours later there's lethargy. If a person is in heroin and he has pain-free, after the effect it becomes more acute to discomfort. Basically, getting high is very subtle, and it could create relaxation, but fascination can be followed by boredom. Sensory enhancement can be followed by feeling flat, or by spiritual depletion. An emotional sense of relevance can be followed by alienation, and so on and so forth. In other words, when people are focusing on the moment of marijuana, it's hard to argue that moment, but what happens after that moment is what's crucial. And what happens basically is you feel depleted. It's very hard to tell a person who has problems with drinking to stop drinking. When the person, God forbid, gets a really bad hangover, and you talk to him, I swear I'll never touch the thing again. You can't get it when he's high, but when he feels the effect of it, marijuana has that problem. That temporarily it creates something artificial, and that's what I'm going to end with something from the Torah in a minute. Something artificial which is followed by a flatness. In fact, someone wrote to Rebbe in 1977, and he asked him, can I use marijuana to create a spiritual high? And he explained, a spiritual high has to come from within. So if you have what to celebrate, you could try to bring out that celebration. And in traditional Hasidic circles, very often alcohol did that. A l'chaim or two l'chaims brought out a type of a holiness or a goodness or an innocence or a love, and it brought it out to the... It didn't make you love your fellow Jew, because if you hated your neighbor and you drank, you punched him. But if deep down you loved your neighbor and you drank, maybe you drank too much and then you hugged him. And that's actually one of the differences between a truly Hasidic Farbrengen and a bar. You understand? You start off in the bar, everyone's sitting so nicely, and then, heaven forbid, you make a comment about his girlfriend or about the sports. He'll kill you. What happened? He's drinking. Because there's no real feeling of affinity. We're all watching, or we're all enjoying, and then you're in my space. And there isn't a good bar in the world that doesn't have a usual fight. But in a traditional Hasidic gathering, or in any gathering actually, doesn't even have to be Hasidic necessarily, if they're sharing wine or alcohol, if they're good, what will be revealed is more good. So the Rebbe said, a spiritual high can be created when you have it inside of you, and then for some reason or other you need to reveal it. Marijuana doesn't bring out, there's nothing inside of you. What's being created is an artificial, what you think you see, you think what you feel. And as soon as that buzz goes off, you're empty. And you actually could fall into a sadness. And then you say to yourself, you know what? School is so boring, I better take another one. And then that's what when I mentioned to you about using and then abusing and then dependence. Abusing basically means where what usually you used to enjoy, you don't bring that enjoyment. So a guy who's an athlete starts smoking, and then he stops showing up to practice. Mom says, or the coach says, "Why don't you show?" He says, "It's not worth it. Who needs it?" So he's already justifying something that used to bring him great pleasure. It's not inside of you which is being expressed. It's something artificial. And therefore I'm going to end with the following statement from the Torah, a teaching. If you look in the book of Leviticus, there's a fascinating story about the two sons of Aaron. On the day that the tabernacle was created, I shouldn't say created, was set up, on that day they brought a fire to God. It was a strange fire that God had not commanded them. And what happened is they were punished, their souls left them right away. Aaron, the father, the high priest, could have gone to pieces. This is my day. God chose me and my family. He didn't say a word. He accepted it. And God says, oh, what Aaron did was wonderful. I'm going to honor him by talking to him privately. And guess what the next passage is? Do not drink wine before serving in the temple. And you ask yourself a simple question. That's the reward? What is it connected to? And some rabbis explain it beautifully. The two sons of Aaron, they were such holy people, their love for God was overwhelming. It was just beyond. They were passionately in love with God. I could say the words, everyone's trying to figure out what that means. I don't know what it means, because I know a little bit of what's called passionate love between people, passionate love to God, but I know it exists. It existed to them to the extent that when they came closer to God, just like you want to be embraced by someone you love, they felt the embrace of God and the neshama just left them. Saints, way beyond the prophecy concept. God talking to them, they just flew out. Aaron HaKohen saw this and admired it. He knew it was wrong, but he said to himself, perhaps this type of feeling is so precious. So when I'm going to serve in the tabernacle, you know what I should do? I'll take a l'chaim, or I'll take a smoke, or I'll do something that will open me up to the spiritual experience of going into the tabernacle and being exposed to God. And you know what Hashem says? Don't drink before you serve. But why? It's going to enhance the experience. It's going to make me appreciate you. No, because it'll come a time where it's the alcohol that's talking, it's not your neshama that's talking. As a general rule from the Torah and many other places in Midrash and Talmud, there's a concept of an authentic religious experience has to come from within. Very rarely can you use accessories to get you there. And if you use the accessory, you understand, it's like a guy walking with a crutch, as if to say, it's his feet that's doing the walking, not the crutch. But he's using the crutch to allow his feet to function the way it should be. Too often, this is true about alcohol. It's certainly true about marijuana. It starts off with, let's have a smoke together. We'll sing some Hasidic songs. Someone will tell a moving story. Someone else will tell a poem. It's all going to be beautiful. It's baloney. It turns out to be something very hollow. The day after, there's no more passion for God at all. Someone once said it this way. The purpose of taking a l'chaim is to open up the wall of the heart. The purpose of a l'chaim is never to break the wall. You understand? The purpose is to open you. The purpose is not to destroy you. When you're under the influence of something which is connected to the mind, you're basically not in control. And that's, I said I would end with this, I will, and that's another reason that I'll bring in. The Rebbe was asked about hypnosis. Hypnosis is amazing what people can do with hypnosis. So they asked him about hypnosis. He says, I am very hesitant to allow it. Why? Because under hypnosis, you're not thinking. Essentially, somehow they you stop thinking and they bring you back. anything that interferes with a Jew thinking is not good. So in terms of Jewish law and occasional usage, it's hard to find that it's forbidden. In terms of a recreation or more habitual, absolutely not. In terms of children, it shouldn't even be used or allowed as a once, but it has to be discussed in a mature way, not in a mashugana way. And as in terms of, I didn't even get a chance to talk about medical marijuana. In terms of medicine, in general, medicine should be advocated. But any medicine that has to do with the mind has to be very, 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 very carefully dealt with. And look at the opiate epidemic. Everyone knows what's going on. People are dying out of a drug that was meant to take away pain. And even that has been abused. Now you want to bring in medical marijuana? It didn't say no. It just got to be very, very, you got to do this with open eyes. Thank you very much for coming. Any other questions? I'll take part.